Welcome to the Amazon's podcast. I'm Glenn Young, owner of Amazon's Fitness Magazine. Celebrate the female physique. Subscribe to Amazon'sFitMag.com. The podcast is brought to you by GPS Photography and Video. Why photography and video? Because a photo's worth 1,000 words, video's worth 1,000,000. GPSPhotoandVideo.com. And Amazon's Fitness Magazine is a publication of GPS Photography and Video. My guest back on the podcast, so glad to talk to him once again, chiropractor Dr. Trey Hodge. He's a coach, trainer. Many are known athletes that are in the Amazon's Fitness Magazine, such as Sheena Olick on the cover that you've seen. So thanks for joining me again, Doc. Really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, man.
So I want to pick up something I wanted to go into from last time. When you have an athlete that's in prep, they've done their show, and they're coming out of prep, what do you do as far as a refeed or to bring them back? Or likewise, if they got another show, say in 2 weeks, they just continue on. What kind of checks do you do, or maintenance checks if they're continuing on, or how do you bring them back, such as a refeed or from a long prep?
Well, if we already know they're doing, or if they got a string of shows we're doing, especially like a pro athlete who has already a lineup of shows that they're looking at, we've already talked about, planned it out. I would have already decided what they were probably going to do in terms of a refeed post show or a cheat meal they can get, depending on the time we have allotted and knowing what we were going to have to do and change into that next show. So they'll already have at least know like what their limitations are even after they get off the stage. So that way we can kind of better plan, better fit, if we know they got upcoming shows that we're going to be getting ready for it. Or if I have a client who does a regional show who's qualified for nationals and we already plan on doing a national based show, then of course they'll get the instructions usually that weekend, knowing that basically this is kind of what our, we're going to stick in these parameters in terms of what we're going to be able to eat. And then that way we can jump back into the routine and things like and keep things rolling strong for us. And I know sometimes, of course, it depends on how much time we have too. If it's if it's 2 weeks from when you get off stage till the next, probably not going to allow a lot, maybe just a little bit of a cheat meal that night after or night of the show itself after you get done with family and friends. Then, of course, Sunday is back to the normal base again. That way we get back into it, get your body back in the rhythm again. Now, for the people who, of course, who say is not continuing the show, that basically is, we've already talked about it and we made the decision that, hey, we're just doing this show and stuff. Well, the biggest thing now is making sure they get out of where they're in terms of metabolism, that's going to be already suppressed and low from the extensive time of prepping, having low calories, having tons of the activity in terms of the level of activity, whether they're doing a lot more cardio or just the training itself, and allowing their body to kind of reset it slowly to where it kind of balance back out. A lot of people don't understand too, whenever you're doing a show and you get off that stage, your metabolism is not going to be as strong as it was, prior to getting ready for the show. So we have to give it a chance to bounce back, and the body will adjust over time because it's all about homeostasis. But you can't just throw it all into the whole mix and expect your body's just going to, reuptake everything you take in food wise, and it's going to handle. And a lot of times, like we have discussed before, when people have what they call the rebound effect, and they just put on this extra fluid weight, and basically their body's just not adhering to like digesting the food. It's like backing it up. Digestion, is slowing down, so it's causing things like acid reflux to happen, GI stuff too. Sometimes people can actually, even if they're not careful, they'll start developing hiccups because of overconsumption of food, and basically the body's just not digesting. It's like, I think it takes time for everything to kind of slowly go through the intestines and everything else. So, you're looking at a few hours. If you're constantly eating because you just crave so much, you're just overfilling yourself way too much that your bodies can handle. So it's really important to like slowly kind of do it to where we basically taper the activity level down and slowly increase the food intake over a sometimes 6-8 week period, sometimes longer if we need longer, because some people have a propensity to just metabolism a little bit slower about getting cranked back up again. And usually the end goal after that is your metabolism is actually at a good spot before we do anything in terms of going into maybe an improvement season or things like that. And usually that period too, during, coming off reversing, also we do want to, if you're taking any type of like stem-based stuff or anything, fat burners, caffeine, we do want to start tapering those down too. We don't want your body to be basically being fight and flight and the sympathetic nervous system's being abused, even going through this, the body to basically have a break. We want your adrenals to kind of take a break too, where they're not so tapped out. You already have been going, nonstop, probably way too long. So your body does need a reset in general. So, and then during that period, we'll go ahead, probably have some lab scheduled after you do basically the reverse see how the numbers looking. Just make sure everything still looks good. There's nothing that's adding pressure in terms of, any type of issues on kidneys or anything. Everything's in a normal playing field before we were even to like really get together and do like a game plan of what we're going to do next, or in terms of improvement season, things like that.
So when you see, and you always see it, that's one of the first questions that everybody asks: where are you going to eat after this? What are you going to have? What was that thing you're craving? And you just see the visuals of everybody reaching in the bags, grabbing donuts and cookies, and and just stuffing their face. And they gained 10, 15 pounds within a week, and it's like, what happened?
Yeah. And that's the thing too. I think we all do the same thing. I think sometimes we all want to try and get as much as variety and taste this, taste that. You just been craving so much, but we still have to keep that within reason. I always say sometimes it's best to just not carry a bunch of stuff to the show with you, like to eat after. Maybe just wait till you're done. That way you can sit there and enjoy a meal, have some nice downtime, take your time eating it, versus like you see a lot of times people backstage, they're scarfing down like 4 or 5 donuts within like a 10-minute period. And then you see them backstage and you see them keep doing this. And of course, they're probably struggling to get it, but they don't, at that point, they don't care. They just the taste and stuff is just hit them, it's hit their, sensory overload basically at that point. You just get that dopamine release and you're just, I call it it's like a food high. You're just so, and your emotions are everywhere. Like, literally people will be backstage almost in tears because the taste is just so intense, like I've always said, people, sometimes you might have weird. Like I said, the weirdest thing is once you get off that stage, you can have probably a corn dog out of like a frozen box that you put in the microwave, and it would probably be the best corn dog you ever had in your life after a show, because your taste buds are just that sensitive, just haven't had that type of stuff that you've had in such a long time. But the biggest thing is the health wise is just not allowing your body to basically just, get to a point where it puts a lot of pressure on your digestive system. It, throws your body in chaos. You put on this extra fluids, and now your blood pressure could be going up higher than it should be because your body's not used to holding an extra 20, 30 pounds, especially in that short period of time. And then on top of that, that means your kidneys have to work harder too. So that's what people have to understand. When you start overloading the body and don't give it time to readjust, you're going to really put it in chaos, and you're going to feel it. Meaning you're going to feel tired, fatigued, sluggish. You're going to be belching a lot. Your appetite's going to be probably all over the place. Sometimes you feel like you just are so stuffed, even though you might have not eaten a lot. It's just your body is just so backed up in terms of how it's digesting your food and everything else. So,
what is the suggested meal after a show? Maybe it's not the sweets. Maybe it's protein, a steak. For example,
I always say just get you can get a combination of like something like maybe a red meat, like a steak or a burger. Fries is not bad, or a potato, loaded potato. And I always say like that, something like that with a small dessert usually is going to, suffice a good bit of different cravings, And I would say that probably one setting would probably suffice you enough, at least where you feel like you got some satisfaction and out of that, But I stay with a lot of people, of course. I think we're getting Brady and we're done with the show, and we know that's it, and then we're done for the season, or we're not planning on. I think that freedom of like, I got choices now. Even though you still want to keep within reason, but then you just kind of keep going and keep going. And like we said, you just feed into the cravings. Yeah, it's easy to start snacking. And sometimes you're not snacking it because you're hungry. You're snacking it just the taste,
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the thing. Yeah. Well, you got to think. I mean, there's probably a list of over 50 different things that people can create while they're getting ready for a show, things that they want after a show. And trust me, if you had half that list, you probably have to go to the hospital because there's no way you can eat all that food in high quantities without having something happen.
Yeah.
Where you're just going to be so, so out of it or so just beat up that you feel like something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've had people who've gone and come off deep end with reverse, like, didn't really do the reverse. They went
Right.
off diet for like a string of 4 days straight. They didn't work out. They weren't active. They basically just sat, ate, slept the whole time. And then I can get the contact say, hey, coach, I'm not feeling so great. I've been having reflux like crazy. And I'll say, well, what have you been eating since the show? And then, of course, I was like, well, this is kind of what happens. This is kind of what's going to happen. And of course, they're like asking me because they think like, do I need to go to the hospital get checked? I was like, basically, they're going to just tell you that, yeah, you've holding a ton of fluid. They might put an IV bag, hook it up to you and things like that. Just
Mm-hmm.
tell you that, yeah, basically your body's just overloaded right now, and you're just having really chronic reflux, and probably suggest you take some like Pepsi or some type of acid reducer.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it happens. It happens to some of the the best. I say I've had pros, even pro athletes who've done probably over 2 or 3 dozen shows that still can have it happen to them if they're not careful.
Mm-hmm. So they just
So
overdo it. And speaking of which, you
yeah,
always there's video out there of Sheena Olick stuffing a donut in her face. What
yeah,
what do you tell Sheena? What do you tell Jamie Hart? Both of them in prep going into the season,
mm,
and it is pro versus amateur. And the longer they do it, obviously, experience, environment, and learning,
yeah.
that they know how to handle it. But take me from the standpoint you got first time competitor, amateur, versus
Mm.
a seasoned pro.
Well, I know with the amateur, since they haven't been through it, I'm going to try to fill them in as much as I can on what to expect. That means
Mhm.
whether it be through the process, day of the show, peak week. I try to like slowly educate a lot on what we're trying to do, what we're trying to do. I usually put a lot of emphasis on the reverse process for a lot of my new people. So that way they
Mhm.
understand the importance that this is really it can be a good benefit to you, or it can hurt you. It can hurt you if you go off the deep end, don't really do the proper reverse, you put on the weight too quick, and then you're discouraged. You end up having the psychological effects of like the basically post-show blues, where you're just so frustrated because you knew what you looked like on stage, and then 2 weeks later you're not even close to that look anymore because you went off the deep end and things like that with everything else. So that's what we try to prevent, because the discouragement sometimes can really be bothersome to a lot of people. And I say sometimes it affects more women than men in terms of that, especially if there's a woman who's a first time who did really amazing, made some great changes. And then they have fun, they do good, they do well, they get off stage, and then they go on vacation for a week too, and do all
Mhm.
this stuff, all this eating and things, come back, and then they're like looking at themselves in the mirror and wondering what happened, because
Yeah.
they were, a few weeks ago they weren't even close to that, and now they're looking a lot different. Still probably not looking bad or anything like that, but it's a lot different than what they were and what they last remember seeing themselves on stage.
Mhm. And the body dysmorphia really is a big thing.
Mm.
From a
Oh yeah,
fan perspective, I think, oh man, they look great, in which we will see it as they do. And then
mm.
you'll see competitors hating themselves in the improvement season, but they don't understand they look better than 90% of the people in the same gender and weight classification, um,
Yeah,
that will ever be that look, because they've never gone through a prep and done it. And it becomes
no.
more psychological. Is it something the thing where, it's a good idea for competitors to talk to a psychiatrist, talk to a counselor, and depending on how bad it is, because um, the body dysmorphia really is a psychological thing that really bothers, and as you said, probably bothers females more than males. But what are
Mm.
some of the suggestions to do to help a competitor through this?
Well, I say if you already have, and you already know you've lived through maladaptive eating issues or disorders in your past,
Right.
I
Hmm.
feel like that needs to be tackled, whether it's concurrently while you're doing this new venture of going to a show. That way you can handle food better, or before or prior to it. The reason why I say that's something that you need to look at is a lot of times because of the maladaptive eating issues on top of the body dysmorphia, it's like a double-edged effect, I say. Because then
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the body dysmorphia kicks in, and then you got someone who's almost could be on that binge and purging type of position now, sneaking back to what they maybe have done before in the past, not saying it's something they did, or if they, maybe battle, a level of anorexia, things like that, then they're going, well, I'm not going to eat. I'm just not going to eat anymore, or, those
Right.
things. So I think you have to tackle that, and the psychological part can be very, very impactful. And like I said, for both men and women, I say, even though I say women get it sometimes affected more, I say women are more affected post show.
Mm.
Men, it could be ongoing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because because I think sometimes the men, because even like my clients that I've coached in the past, to past, present, they're, I say most of my men I say are more, I say, outwardly spoken on their body dysmorphia or how they
Mm-hmm.
look. And they look great. And that's the thing is, like you said, yeah, based on the, they're way above the 90th percentile, but I think they're so hyper focused on the 10% or less that they compete against or compete with or in the same fitness industry. So there's a lot of like trying to be better, but also trying to fit into that realm, and not feeling like you're still part of the group. You haven't X'd out yet, type thing.
Right.
So I think that's kind of part of it. And, it's just one of those things is you have to really keep at it in terms of not allowing it kind of put you down or bring you down. Because it can happen to the best of us. It can happen to ones that you never think it would happen, even the ones who have probably these top level physiques and stuff, they could be battling some of the worst body dysmorphia.
Therapeutics. You have a distinct advantage, you being a doctor of chiropractic and the experience of how long you've been in the industry. And there's a lot of different things that you can use to help your athletes during the maintenance, the soreness. You got a 16, 18-week prep. Everybody talks anything from ice cold bath to red light to saunas. What are some of the things you use? Or obviously you want to cater this to the athlete to see what works and what doesn't work. But what are some of the things or the newest things that are out there that you can use?
Yeah, like I said, there's more access to a lot of definitely the therapeutics and stuff in terms of just even for people who prep. And I think the educational part of it has came a long ways and educating everybody about what to do for helping the recovery process. I say a lot of things that I would always say is like cold plunges are great. I think those are always great for recovery, especially if you do deal with a lot of like joint soreness, body achiness,
Mm-hmm.
recovery sometimes can be a little bit hindrance, especially if you work a major body part like lower body, you're that person who stays sore almost like 4 or 5 days, like really sore. Something like cryotherapy definitely will help, or cold plunging. A lot of times infrared saunas are good. We actually have an infrared sauna for our stretch side of our stretch therapy. So we do have that. We do have the Normatec boots and stuff for helping with the circulation and stuff and recovery as well. So there's so many different things now, even with the cold laser treatments you can do now in terms of that can help. And then, of course, you can also look at some of the recovery things that they're getting real popular now are on the peptide side too,
Mm.
where you had the things like BPC 157, TB 500 that are some of the top ones now in the market that are just used for just the simple purpose of recovery. And I know with our HRT clinic, we do those too there as well. I
Mm-hmm.
usually, for a lot of people, I say I would suggest that if they're very, very active, they deal with a lot of injuries, a lot of chronic stuff like chronic shoulder, chronic knees, those type of things that have so much inflammation in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
Because something like BPC does attack that pretty quick and it's effective. I say more so than not get great results with the BPC 157, and then
Mm-hmm.
TD 500 is very similar to the BPC 157, just a little bit different of a release, but they're very close in terms of the anti-inflammatory responses to it.
And how often would you suggest a treatment throughout say a 16, 18-week prep? Or is it just as needed?
I say as needed with it. I wouldn't necessarily say you just want to just continually using it, but I think it's
Right.
something good just on that side. If you, like I said, have those chronic ailments and things and you just battle them on a daily anyways, yeah, I would use it to help facilitate just the recovery of that and make sure that you basically are allowing your body to recover enough and you're not putting more damage. Because, of course, if we're
Mhm.
constantly inflaming areas that are especially chronic, then we have more issues with the development of scar tissue, increasing, structural damage and stuff, weakening tendons and ligaments because there's so much of excess of inflammation in the area that can happen and stuff too. So we definitely want to do the things like I said to kind of keep as healthy as possible. So I say we use that more as a needed base if we need to.
And of course, you also have available scraping, massage therapy,
Mm,
and
yeah.
cupping, which you basically just drawing the
Yeah.
blood literally out of the area. How do you work
Yeah.
that in? It works for some, works not, but it takes a minute. Because I always hate it because you're getting ready to do a photo shoot. You say, "Oh, I was just cupping the other day. You think you can take that out in Photoshop?" No, no.
Yeah, it's a little
I'm not
obvious.
getting down to go in there and take all these little circles off your back. But talk to me about that, how you work that in, and it really just as needed and what works for each athlete. But with so many
Mm.
things out there, and you talked about the peptides standpoint, how much better is it massage therapy versus sauna, red light versus cupping, cold baths or cold plunges versus massage therapy? It really just comes down to what works with each athlete. But what are
Yeah.
the things that you've seen to work the best? And again, you want to cater this to the athlete, but
Yeah.
talk to me about that standpoint.
I'd say if you're an athlete, you're on a budget. Sticking to
Yeah.
like say the cold plunges, things like that. I only use say heat for areas that could be real tight but not inflamed. But
Okay.
I would say the cold plunges or cryotherapy, or even if you're using ice packs, I would say those are whenever you have any type of pain, inflammation, swelling, things like that. That's when the ice pack or the cryo is going to be ideal. And of course, like I said,
Right.
for the budget, yeah, at least that's one that we can definitely manage and afford. Now, if you start getting into the realm of massage, the cupping, the
Hmm.
Graston, it does, but these are great investments. I think they're amazing. I get usually massage work almost on a weekly with cupping.
Hmm.
Do also
Hmm.
get Graston work as well because I'm old, feeble, and breaking up and falling apart.
Yeah.
So I try to take in as much as I can with therapies because, to be honest, I was the ignorant guy who basically trained, did a lot of heavy training, powerlifting, played football,
Hmm.
competed
Hmm.
and stuff, thinking that I'm never gonna have injuries or get hurt. Of course, now I've got basically two half working shoulders, range of motion is a little crazy. Got two tears in one arm. Luckily for me, I knock on wood, I have had
Hmm.
any chronic knee, hip, or lower back issues. But so for me, I mean, I still like now I'm like more into the therapy side of things. So like I said, between stretches every 2 weeks, massage work, infrared sauna,
Hmm.
cryo, cupping, Graston, chiropractic adjustments. That's my normal routine. That's my staple.
Right.
And then sometimes I'll occasionally use the BPC, especially with my shoulders when I'm having some chronic flare ups or like a lot of inflammation and restrictions in those.
Yeah. And then a massage therapy session, just so people will know, can be north of 500 to $600 per session, depending. And you always want to go with the best, the people that know
Yeah.
what the heck they're doing. Obviously. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it
I
can
mean,
be
you
very
can,
tough.
the massage cost can range. I mean, you could probably book even at low end massage that some of these places like Massage Envy for like $80, $90 for a
Hmm.
session
Hmm.
for an hour. And then I know there's some therapists that go, and I've had some therapists that were a little bit higher that were really good. They were
Hmm.
worth it. That were charging more along lines of 300 or more for an hour. Now granted, their educational experience and stuff, and even their track record and their resume of who they work with, athletes and things, is probably more extensive. But at the
Hmm.
same time, I still get the benefits. And I mean, even from the maybe the one at Massage Envy, I'll still get benefits from it. But now I think as an athletic standpoint, if I'm want to work with someone who's used to work with athletes and seeing common
Hmm.
injuries and things and how you say, knows the target areas, where to hit, things like that. I feel like the one who's experienced, I'll probably get more out of in the long run. Even though it's going to cost more, but I realize it is an investment in my body. If I want this body to keep kicking for as long as it can, and that's my investment for myself.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on peptides in geriatric health? People that are in their 70s, 80s. I mean, they're obviously probably on already a lot of prescription drugs, such as
Yeah.
chlorothalidone for blood pressure. Um, and to me, outside looking in, it would seem like I wish that more things that are in the competitive bodybuilding industry, was put into geriatric health with the baths and the massage therapy versus just give them a prescription, put them to bed, and go from there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I say the model is evolving. I feel like now the generation that I say is becoming the older generation now are looking more into the therapeutic side, because they're realizing that sometimes the medicational or the medicinal side of things can be sometimes pretty harmful if it's not needed. Now, granted, if you're diabetic, there's no way I say anything out there is going to treat that unless you're taking something that strictly is targeting for diabetes or what you've got. But now, granted, if you're someone who might be on the borderline of certain things and stuff, and you just maybe for like in a lot of the peptides out there that would help mitigate some of this, and of course, healthy diet and being active, all that would help too. That is becoming a little bit more common, and I say for that generational period of like, I say you probably find a lot of your let's say the high say demographics between like the 40 to 60 age range right now that are seeking that now. Now, granted, if I say the older generation and that they're more likely they're used to what their how I say the routine medication, medicinal routine, things like that. So a lot of them might not want just to change because they're afraid if they do something bad can happen or their health might decline. But now I feel like with integration of a lot more hormone replacement clinics and a lot of the studies coming out now with a lot of the peptides, and there's peptides being coming out, all the time now. There's so many. I say there's so many, but there's only some main ones I think you really everybody's gonna be familiar with. But they got tons of different ones that are, of course, and they're doing a lot more data on a lot of these too. And I think you're going to find some that are going to be pretty much something that can be used more of a, even for geriatrics and things like that too.
Okay. We had talked about this subject earlier, and I want to broach it as delicately as I can and tactfully, but there's really no way other than just to say it. In the world of coaching, how do you handle when someone tries to steal your athlete? And how do you recruit your athletes?
Well, for me, I've never been the recruiting type. I'm type person. I kind of like stay in my lane, and I promote myself, and then of course, hopefully, my clients, what I do, what I produce, my clients who might communicate with other people, who refer people to me. That's where I usually pull all my clients from. I've never, and even when I used to go to shows and, and I would be mingling with different people and stuff, I had this whole policy that I don't talk to anybody as a client unless two things, unless they have, already discontinued the coach and stuff, if they're inquiring about coaching.
Right.
Or it's just really as a friendly level communication, things like that, nothing tied to that. And there's been times where I say in the past, out of respect for some of the coaches that I'm really cool with, friends with, or have known for years and stuff.
Right.
A lot of times, if they have left that coach, I will contact the coach just to be sure on terms and things like that. Because, because I don't want to appear if that client, because sometimes, if a client they can say, yeah, I left it, I'm not no longer with that coach. You don't know how it ended. And if it ended where they just ghosted the coach and then you come out of it and then you got their client, then it looks like, well, he must have snuck in and took the client. And I don't want that ever to be the issue. I don't want to be at any quarrels or anything with anybody in the industry, especially on the coaching side, because I feel like we all are doing the same thing. If anything, everybody produces some great work and it's respected and it's, a respectable thing. But at the same time, I'm just not a big fan of trying to like really communicate with athletes and almost trying to give them reasons why they should change coaches. I mean, I know it happens. It's happened to me before where I've had coaches who would approach my clients who were, great athletes or had a lot of potential. And I admit I have very loyal clients because they will tell me. Uh, and I'll even tell them, I was like, well, you always have the option. I was like, if and I can always say, guys, like, because sometimes you can be with me as a coach, but sometimes we might not be the perfect fit. It could be a communication thing, or it could be just dynamics and stuff. And I was like, it's perfectly fine. I have nothing. And I actually tell my clients, I'm like, if they do decide and they want to change a coach, whatever, I have no issues with that. If that's what they want to do, that's their choice and stuff. And I always keep a good relationship with my clients. And I've had clients who've come back to me because I kept the open dialogue. I never, viewed anything different. Totally respected them, no matter what they chose on that. And I feel like that's why, like, a lot of my relationships have been long lasting with a lot of people I've worked with, because there was never any type of issue with that, And I feel like my conscience has always been relatively clear as a coach, because I've never have tried to take clients from coaches and try to do those things. I just don't really feel like it's not the right thing to do. And I know for me, I would be fighting against that, because I would feel a lot of guilt with it. Even if I don't personally know the coach, I would still have guilt, because I know how it can feel if you are a coach, and say if a client who doesn't tell you they're leaving and they just leave, and then you find out on social media that they're working with someone else. And that happens a lot too, where the coach doesn't even know the client left. Basically, the client can seem all great with them on Saturday after a show, and then Monday they're posting that they're ready to start their journey with a new coach.
Yeah.
And
it all plays out on social media.
Yeah.
And
it's
sort of horrible.
And that's where you get a lot of the back and forth that sometimes that drama can hit. And I think I'm the anti-drama coach, so I don't like the drama. So I try to stay removed from that side of it. So I figure if I keep in my lane, basically produce what I can with my athletes stuff, and let that speak volumes for it. Let them, communicate with other people. If somebody's interested and you want to use me, referral based, because those are, to me, are the best you want, is referrals. Just because the client's basically speaking, positive of you, they've already put your name out there in a good, positive way.
Yeah.
So that person already has a good outlook. It's not like you're just someone they just found, on a page that has a few thousand followers with a few athletes, and they're just curious, So
word of mouth advertising, proving
the it's always best. Yeah.
But you always see that athlete, has done 2 or 3 shows or got their pro card, and now all of a sudden they're coaching. What's your take on that? Or just a thing of you send them a quiet message, look, you haven't done anything. You shouldn't be out there trying to give advice on coaching.
I say this much, because I know that a lot of people can maybe pull the trigger quick because they're real inspired and stuff and everything else. And not saying it's too quick, but I say you definitely want to build your base of what you know as much as you can before you're trying to direct other clients to basically follow in and compete too. And I do offer for my clients who do want to coach, for me to do like a mentorship program, which I oversee. Basically, they work with the clients, and then I'm here for questions, suggestions, whatever it is, and they use me as a resource for that. And that way I give them control, but then I'll give them suggestions or things I would say, well, or if they send me labs, like, well, let's check this and do this. And, this maybe adjust a few things here and there, just more of a confirmation on things too. And I feel like that allows them to build, of course, build their clientele, be comfortable, get, and I say they do learn each client, they get better, keep improving. Because your skill sets as a coach, I say it does get better, especially the more you learn, and then you learn different athletes, different body types, whether it be different divisions you're working with, things like that. Like I would say, like, for instance, if you're a female competitor, you were competing in bikini, I wouldn't suggest you taking on a male bodybuilder, as one of your first clients.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I would say go with your division that you're familiar with, that you maybe have been in for a while. You understand it a little bit better. You understand what the judges look for. Build that. Start integrating, maybe more female athletes in different divisions, like, wellness, figure, work with
Right.
that. Educate while you're doing it, meaning learn. Take whether it's like taking seminars, classes, online stuff, anything that's going to give you a little bit more of a base knowledge to pull from, and that way you just keep building that. And then of course you can definitely over time build and of course solidify your name more as a coach in the industry. It is very saturated, with it now than it used to be whenever I first started. And even when I first started, I really only dealt with men at first. Okay.
Right.
And then as I felt comfortable and stuff, I started to work with a few women and more women. And then I say after, all these years, I've been able to work all divisions, even had a wheelchair athlete, which of course, even with that, before I took them on, I have worked with, disabled athletes before, but
Right.
I say just for that person, I learned a lot too, because I learned things that we could do even on as athlete, and realizing there is a difference of calorie consumption, because they're not using but a percentage of their body, because they can't use their lower body, and we're not training lower body, but we still got to do things for coming down weight, getting leaner, things like that. And this was a pro wheelchair athlete who turned pro, and then also was competing in Olympia. And so, like I said, those are the things and the challenges are always going to be a good thing. You learn the most from the challenges. You learn most when you have to really apply yourself and really have to communicate a lot more with clients sometimes. And sometimes there are clients you need to communicate more with, whether it's their first time or it's maybe a client that does have a lot of things that's going on health wise, and you just got to help, just communicate more with that.
Right. Coach hopping. A lot of athletes go from coach to coach. Maybe they didn't do as well as they thought they should have done, whether in the Olympia or what have you. And a lot of that causes that they didn't give enough time with the coach. It's a maturity issue. And then at the same time, you always hear athletes say, well, he knows me or she knows me. I've been with this coach X, Y, and Z. It's not just loyalty, but he knows my body. And when you look at that, and you've obviously been on both sides of the platform, where a competitor may badmouth you unintentionally or intentionally, but then those that go from at coach to coach, you sort of shy away from that, like, she's already been with, or he been with 2 or 3 coaches. I mean,
yeah, I've actually
look in the mirror and say, it's not a you issue, it's a me issue.
Yeah. I've been in that position where I've not worked with a client because I know the history, I know the track record, I know they jump
Toxic,
a lot.
yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like for me, I'd rather not bring that on. I've had and I've had a few pro athletes who have approached me coaching. This is like, I remember even years ago, and I knew who they worked with in the past. I know it's been a string of different coaches and stuff. I know the current coach they had, and like I said, it wasn't like they came in completely off. They actually still looked great. They just weren't maybe quite hitting the spot to win a show. They were kind of close, but not winning show. And if I already know the coach and I know their track and I know this is a great coach, I just know it's just really the athlete who just who wants to switch, thinking it's gonna get better. And sometimes I've suggested, so why don't you stay with your current coach? And because they've actually did really well, and they've only been working with you for so many months, and I feel like you give them a chance, you probably will see a lot more. And a lot of times they don't want to hear that. They want you to basically say, yeah, I'll take you on, I'll improve you, I'll make sure you win your next show. They want these guarantees. And it's just not always there. You can't, trust me, there's never a guarantee. I don't care how good your client looks. There's never a guarantee of anything. You don't know who's showing up that day. You don't know how the judges are going to view your athlete compared to the other athletes they're going against. So there's a lot of variables there you got to keep in mind. So I say, I know as a pro athlete, I know probably more pro than amateur. It's easy for a lot of them to get discouraged because they are on a tougher competitive playing field. And if they're not if you're not getting better or improving in place, I think sometimes they can easily put the fall on the coach.
Right.
And I say majority time is more likely not the coach.
Right.
So.
And it's tough because as photographer, it's word of mouth advertising. You can have a bad shoot or whatever and get that bad review. But the same token with coaches, if you get into a situation where you've seen over the last recent years, a competitor dies and immediately everybody points to the coach, but that may not necessarily be true. I mean, because the athlete just may have been hard-headed and didn't listen to you. But how do you handle the negativity when everybody's just looking, hey, it's the coach's fault, and everybody's on their podcast saying this and that? How do you recover from that?
Well, it's like and this would be, and you're being a coach, you're in the professional atmosphere. You are going to be hyper ridiculed no matter what with anything. And I say for the times I know that athletes has sustained some type of, whether it is, Lord forbid, if it's something that takes a life or something that puts them in a hospital or whatever, everybody's going to put the magnifying automatically on the coach. They don't want to say it's the athlete. They want to say it's the coach, usually. And then a lot of times, if the athlete is transparent, they will tell and say, well, I did use this and I did use this. And it might have been a diuretic usage thing, or they might not have been doing the diet that the coach sent them or the proper water intake. I say you find that more with the whole, the water intake, diuretic usage closer to show when people actually have those crazy things that happen. Because they're pushing too hard. And even if the coaches tell them that, okay, this is what we got to do. This is all we got to do. We don't have to do anything crazy, nothing extreme. And then they're in their mind, they're like, well, if we do a little bit of this and we do this, then they'll make me look sharper in their mind.
Right.
But they don't want to tell the coach. They don't want to communicate to the coach that. They want to do it. And then if it goes right, they might tell that coach later on after a show, well, I did do this and stuff. And of course, as a coach, you're kind of like taken back because you're like, well, you didn't do what I
told you to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a little frustration with that because that it's liabilities on you. If something happens, even though it didn't, but if something does, then everything's going to be pointing at you. I mean, the same thing. If I have a patient comes in and I work on them and they immediately feel better, right? And then later at night, they're real sore. And then I might get a call that say, hey doc, I came in, I felt great, but I was really sore last night. And then and I was like, well, if you haven't been adjusted in a while, you can get a little bit of soreness, but it will usually a day later is fine. And usually it is, but of course at first they're like, what'd you do? It's like, what did you do to me that created this problem? And it was like, well, this is how the body's reacting. It can happen. But it's always that, that's going to be. It's always the person who's the professional that's going to get the finger point at first to take responsibility, not the athlete themselves. Even though if the athlete themselves know that they were in the wrong, a lot of times they're not openly wanting to admit it because it shows that they're not sticking to the routine, and they don't want basically to let their coach down, knowing that sometimes that they are not doing what they're supposed to do. But it happens a lot, a lot. And I'll say this, I have clients who, I've had clients who probably won't tell me everything, and I have clients who tell me everything.
Yeah.
I prefer the transparency. Now, granted, I don't prefer always not sticking to a plan, but at least I know, and we can make things right and get things back where we need to be. But also too, if my priority is your health and you're not completely disclosing me everything, at least that we're supposed to be doing, but you're not doing, that puts me where I'm like, I'm clueless of what to expect if something did happen.
All right.
So
peak week. A lot of times you'll hear, well, the coach missed a peak, or the peak week was messed up, whether they flew overseas or not overseas. Take me through the peak week and what adjustments that you make to get that horse ready to run.
Well, in a perfect peak week setting, if the person's been, methodically doing what they need to, everything is just flowing together really well. They look great. There's not really much to really try to do. Then I always say, don't do too much. Just do a little bit, enough just to bring things in, tighten things up just a tad bit. Do anything extreme. And I think that's always the best way. That's the safest way, and that's the best way to ensure that when you're on stage, you're going to feel your best. Because, like I think I said before on the last one, is my goal is for you to have as little stress as possible, besides probably the anxiety of being on stage, because everybody sometimes gets that still a stage fright.
Right.
Also, to feel your best energy wise, not feel like you're dehydrated, not feel like you're sluggish or about to fall out. I don't want to see someone on stage like they're deer in headlights because they're so out of it. I want them to feel good, rest as much as they can. So I want to be those 2 to 3 days prior to show. I want it to be the least taxing and the most restful period of time it can be, even with you competing, as much as possible. That way, we're basically taking the stress off the body as much as we can. We're allowing your body to settle. We're allowing your body to recover because, of course, it's been training like hell for probably 4 months or longer. So trying to get to where you actually feel like you feel great, like you're excited, you're ready to show all the hard work you put into it. You look great. The small things we did, you're just going to look just great and maybe even better on stage too as well. So that's the thing, and I think that's what I always look at. And I think some people put so much emphasis on peak, way too much. Because reality is, if you're ready, you really don't have to have a big peak week. You really just need maybe a little bit of food in you just to make sure you got plenty of sodium, a little bit of carbs, just to make sure you're filling the glycogen back out whenever you are starting to get ready and get pumped up. Make sure the food is digested. Make sure you're still plenty hydrated, not that you're depleting the muscle itself, so you have no volumizing the muscle at that point because you are too dehydrated. And as long as you do that, you're fine. But if you're trying to manipulate this, manipulate that, take sodium out, put it here, rotate this in, this out, deplete the water for the last 24 hours, you're doing all this stuff. You're just causing this havoc within your body internally, because then your body doesn't know which way to go, And so when I say when someone misses a peak, it's because they did too much.
Right.
That's what's missing a peak. And missing a peak is when you do too much, because I think the biggest thing is athletes like, well, I just didn't carb up enough. Oh, trust me, you have plenty of carbs. You probably have way plenty. And it's just the fact that basically, you just feel that some reason you might have felt like, oh, I was flat. Well, you might have been too dehydrated. You might didn't have enough sodium in your body. Or if you feel like you still miss peak yourself, well, guess what? That big meal you just ate 2 hours before the show, it's not going to translate and show, probably for at least 8 to 12 hours, depending on what's in it.
Yeah.
As far as actually show where your body's actually utilizing it, because it's still digesting. So, I always tell people, when you do peak week and you start loading Thursday and Friday's really what's going to show. Saturday's not going to really show much. And that's usually, for me, I don't load much on a Saturday, because at that point, I don't want your digestion getting backed up. I don't want you complaining that you can't use the bathroom. I want you just to have enough to where you still have some satiation, but you're not full. You're not full. You're not able to hit your poses because your diaphragm's not dropping or expanding like it needs to give you full inhalation. You're not getting full tidal volume because of that, because you got all this undigested food just sitting in the stomach and putting pressure against everything. And that's what happens. And I think that's when people get and they're super bloated, and you see a lot, especially I say a lot more guys do this, because I've seen guys backstage sometimes. I see one pro athlete, and this is at Arnold, down 6 bananas 10 minutes before going on stage.
Jesus.
6 bananas. So you thinking those 6 bananas are going to show during that prejudging when you're about to go on stage in 10 minutes? Probably not. But he had a hard time controlling his abdomen because it was just so much. You got to think 6 bananas, that's a ton of food just sitting there.
Yeah.
So,
and everybody said, well, he looks bloated. And you hear that a lot, especially with the men. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the problem, because that's the thing is, you probably have undigested food that's sitting there. You shouldn't have really much on that stomach that needs to be digested by the time you hit stage. You need to be, I even suggest sometimes be eating very light or semi-fasted sometimes on stage is better, especially for prejudging. Now, if you got time between prejudging and finals, we might sneak in a meal or even a burger or something like that. Something if you got hours and hours, that way you can chill, relax, settle, and stuff like that, and that'd be it. But like I said, I think just sometimes people with peak, they do too much in a short frame of time, thinking it's going to make a difference, and it doesn't. And of course, once their body cools down, settles out, they are hydrated, they got sodium in their body, they've rested, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Then of course, that Sunday morning they wake up like, whoa, this is how I look. And it's not saying that that look will win the show or it's going to be by far the best look. They just notice how they feel. They're done with the
Mm-hmm.
show, no stress. Their probably cortisol levels are lower. They probably have pulled off some of the fluid that they were holding a little bit from eating. The body has actually is all the sugar and things is the sodium and everything it is working. You've already rehydrated some, so that's showing.
Mm-hmm.
So you just got the volumization on that Sunday that's hitting you hard. But trust me, you couldn't have carried a look on stage because you probably have been bloated feeling, probably feel lethargic, tired because you still are
Yeah.
just kind of weighing down with all the food still. So it's just one of those things. That's why I never say like I don't think there's really true in missing the peak as long as if you're ready, you shouldn't need to do much getting into the show.
Right.
So
And you touched on it a little bit, but let's go to prejudging. Prejudging is done, and your athlete's in the top 3. What do you do? What do you not do? And by the same token, prejudging is done, and your athlete's not in the running. They're 10th, 11th, or 12th. How do you handle the emotions of the athlete or they're not doing well? And how do you handle the emotions of the athlete? And what do you do to fine tune the athlete between prejudging and finals when they've done well?
I still want the person who's not placing maybe top 3 or not in contention for an overall or a top title. I still want them to know the importance of being back, especially if you're a professional athlete, that you're being back, you want to be ready. So I'll still kind of really keep it relatively reasonable on the meal between, as far
Mm-hmm.
as what to eat, because I don't want them to also like throw the towel, eat whatever they want, come back and just you look like they don't care
Right,
because they
right.
figure everything's done, and they're even the presentation and being on stage, the whole mood's changed. It's like, Debbie
Mm-hmm.
Downer at that point. But if it's someone who's close stuff, I try to keep it close. So I just figure like we just need to keep the look, let your body rest a little bit between, if we got a few hours, get off your feet, let your body settle down. I want you to get some water. I might tell them how much water I want because I want them to still be hydrated. They just posed, so they
Mm-hmm.
probably lost some water. So we need to make sure we're getting replacement of that. Maybe still a meal, but nothing crazy heavy, just maybe a little bit more carbs than anything, not heavy fats. Just maybe just a little bit something more carbs and a little bit of protein, not much more than that. And just that way, they're just getting a little bit, maybe just a little bit better. Not much. It's not like you're going to change drastically within hours, but just a
Yeah,
little bit if it's close. Especially if we're looking at, hey, you know what? It's really between you and another contender. It can go tit for tat. We know
right.
we're in the running. That'd be the way I would probably approach it more on that scale. But still, either way, I still want both athletes, whether they're placing at the top of the level or they're not, they still approach it the same thing with professionalism of coming back. 'Cause I think the worst
Right.
thing to do, and this happens a lot, I'd say more so probably at your amateur shows, regional shows, where if someone is not in the first call out, they're
Yes.
discouraged and they just don't even come back for finals.
Mm-hmm.
And to
Mm-hmm.
me, that's a red mark on the athlete. It's a red mark on the coach because then the coach looks bad because their athlete has just left
Yeah.
just because they didn't place where they wanted to.
And it comes out as unprofessional, and judges
Yeah,
mentally take mental notes on that, and then they say,
no, they
okay.
do.
And
Yeah.
then what happens the next show? Okay, last time this person just walked off stage or was pouting,
Mm.
So it's a lot that goes into that to try to hold and keep your emotions together when you don't do well.
Yeah, I mean it is, and I know it's easy to get emotional, especially when you're looking at competition. I played
Right.
competitive sports all my life, so I know the emotions can fly. But at the same time, you have to understand you're also, we're grown adults too.
Mm-hmm.
We got other people doing the same thing that we're doing. That day we might just not been the best athlete, which is fine. Just gives us something going back to the drawing board, see what needs to be improved, see what needs to be done, especially if I want to still pursue it. If I still
Right.
want to pursue
Right.
it, I still got the hunger for it. I want to learn from what I can to be better, to make the improvements. So that way, at least the next time, I know exactly like what I'm coming with and the improvements I've made, and be proud of that, and see what I can see
Mm-hmm.
where I place it in this next show.
All right. Backstage passes. Um, how important is it for coaches to have a good relationship with the promoter? Because a lot of times I always hear the horror story of well, they made me pay for a backstage pass, where the other promoters say, yeah, all coaches are allowed to come back. How do you
Yeah.
engage in that conversation? Because it's just not and obviously you've been doing it for a while, so probably not an issue. But for say that new coach, or maybe he or she is not on that level, how do they approach the promoter and say, hey, can I get a backstage pass so I can be back with my athlete?
Yeah, I mean, I say some promoters, if they have the space and if it's not overcrowded, they'll allow the backstage passes, and a lot of times you can buy the backstage pass. I know now you need to have your NPC card, whether if you're not competing, you still have the NPC card to get the backstage pass. So it costs money, and
Yeah.
as long if your athlete wants you backstage and you can't get there unless you got a backstage pass, you just can't be back there. I always make sure to let the athlete know, because there might be some shows too I'm at that I'm not going to expect a backstage pass, and I'll let them know,
Right.
say, well, this is the cost. So if I don't have to be back there, but if you want me back there, then this is what it's going to cost, for me to get a backstage pass, so that if they wanted to cover it. And I usually suggest, if I'm not able to get backstage and it costs, say, if it's going to cost the athlete $200 or more, I'll say, you know what? I don't feel like it's needed. I can see you can step out over here. I can look at you off to the side. I don't have to be backstage to look at you, go through some poses, see how things are looking. And honestly, sometimes backstage can be so chaotic. I mean, you're bumping elbows and things like that,
Yeah.
and it's hard to be in a position where you can really truly go through poses with your client even there too. So I say that to me is just the way I do it now. If I am at a show where I'm able to go backstage and stuff, I'm able, or if coaches or say a promoter is letting me at least check my client, make sure everything's okay, I'll do that. But out of respect for the promoter, their show, it's a business too. I don't want to undermine that as well. And I want to have respect for whoever, even if it's people I've known that have been promoters for years and I've known for years. I still want a respect level of that, to where they understand, like, I understand what they do. I understand this is a business. I understand their promoter. And I know they have probably dozens and dozens of coaches who want to be able to go back there. But of course, if they rules are set, I don't want to go against that either. But like I said, I'll say there's a huge importance of being backstage as a coach. So I've been at shows where I've been backstage the whole time, and I've been a coach who's not been backstage and still work fine with my athletes. So it's kind of one of those things where I just let it be known, if the athlete wants me backstage, or I have athletes that want me backstage, then remember this, it does cost. So if you guys are okay with pitching in, getting it, I'll be back there. But if it's too much, which I might say, there's a lot of money for a backstage just for this show.
Yeah.
Especially if I'm having to get an NPC card on top of the backstage pass, that's a lot to throw out. So I'll leave it up to the client if they want that. But like I said, I don't really go to probably as many, like I told you before, as many shows as I used to. But I admit, like when I used to go, I used to sometimes be able to get backstage here and there, but still same thing. I still didn't do it unless the promoter was, hey, like, Trey, you're good. Go backstage. We need to check your athlete out real quick.
Right.
And sometimes if they do that, I won't stay backstage, because I feel like, what, I don't want to be in the way. There's so much going on. I'll just look my athlete and I can get back into the crowd.
Right. Last question from a coach's perspective. And I talked about the promoter issue, and as you know, I talked with Ashley Jones. Female bodybuilding, women's bodybuilding. As a coach, what do you see could be the fix for them to get more shows, more prize money, or is this just a promoter women's bodybuilding issue, not really a coach's issue?
I think, honestly, at this point, I think it's going to go and fall in the promoters too, more so when it comes, especially if you're looking at the pro shows and the prize money. I think when, and I know there was a big discussion on the whole prize money thing and everything else and stuff. And of course, I understand all sides to it. I know that, of course, the promoters are putting out the money for the prizes. So I know, every promoter can't dish out Olympia and Arnold type of prize.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that. And then of course I know the as far as with the divisions like men's bodybuilding open, things like that, sometimes gets a little bit notoriety, more so because it's just one of the bases that usually generates a lot of money too. And then, of course, with the promoters, now promoters to themselves, they can displace the importance, not saying the importance, but displace the money differently a little bit to enhance more of like the turnouts. I know a lot of shows when Wings of Strength in the beginning were putting a lot of money into a lot of the women's bodybuilding shows, more so than usual for a while there. And I feel like that helped out because the women's like, I think as women, you're like, oh, okay, they're putting more into it. There's more with female bodybuilding shows, the prize money's improved, especially when the Rise of Phoenix came out, things like that. So I think you have this big jolt because women are wanting to jump in and take, and like go ahead and take the season day with it because now they're bringing back women's bodybuilding. Now I think we're back to that what it was prior to that a little bit now, and because there is lack of numbers, and and honestly, and that could be a little bit of the competitor side too because they don't really promote as much the women's bodybuilding like they used to back in the 80s. And now with wellness coming in, that's kind of taking a whole like new audience. And you're pulling away a lot from the bodybuilding audience for females too, because it's displaced against the other categories for female categories now.
Right.
So I think that it goes on the promoters, it goes on, I say the competitors too, because also when you have like regional shows that a promoter puts a women's bodybuilding division, but you only have one or two women athletes there. And then on a national show, you're barely getting, 3 or 4 in a class. Those numbers end up affecting pro level. Yeah. So I think that's the problem, and we're seeing that in the women's bodybuilding and even in some women's physique too. I've seen it now. Women's physique still have more shows than women's bodybuilding, and there's still, I think, a bigger base. But I feel like it's dropped off where it used to be. I say when you had Dana Lynn Bailey, who was in it, was it quite a few, like Sarah Hurley, Giuliani. We had those. That was probably the pinnacle of women's physique because, of course, that was when the division was new, it was fresh. You had some amazing athletes, some amazing ambassadors of that sport that were leading the way, and we just don't have those type of who figures there anymore. So it's changed. It's shifted the focus. And one thing we do know, things do get trendy in fitness sometimes where things shift a lot, based on divisions and things like that. What's popular, what's now. So I think that's the thing is, when we stop promoting it as a promoter, athlete, even, some of your head people, some like, if Wings of Strength is not applying maybe as much as they used to, then of course it is going to lose some of the notoriety because the importance of women's bodybuilding is not as much in comparison to some of the other divisions, and that's where, like I said, then the prize money gets displaced more because they're like, okay, well, this division brings more. And so, I mean, when it looks like, I say as promoters, whether you're, the Arnold, the Olympia, or promoting the Olympia, or you're promoting even just your normal pro shows, I think maybe displacing the money a little bit differently. Maybe not setting the men like much higher, just enough to maybe justify it, but not extremely high, where it's 10 times. Like say the first prize winner of men is making 10 times more than the winner of women's bodybuilding.
Exactly.
And I think that's the biggest thing. It's just that gap. It's a huge gap. But I think if we can minimize the gap, increase the promotions of it, promoters kind of pull together, especially the ones who really want to see women's bodybuilding just keep hitting it and keep taking off. Doing those things, I think, do help over time. But you got to keep at it. If you don't, then of course you're just going to keep losing that following.
Appreciate you, man, for coming on, Dr. Trey Hodge. Looking forward to your article you're going to be writing next month in the July issue for Amazon's Fitness Magazine from the Coaches Corner. So excited about that, and always give me a great perspective from a coach's purview, and I really appreciate your time.
I appreciate it for having me, bud.
Take care. Talk soon, and maybe we do a third round, but answer a lot of questions that I definitely had. And so once we get it out there, we'll see, of course, what the response will be from the population or the populace to say, hey, that was great stuff. We need to bring him back on and talk to him more, because there's a whole lot that people think they know, but they don't know until they find out.
Yeah, and it's all about perspectives too. You know, when you've done different things in it and stuff too, but your viewpoints do adjust to it. You know, a lot more.
Right. Right. Appreciate you, man. Talk soon.
All right, thanks again. All right, Glenn.
All right. Bye. Dr. Trey Hodge, really enjoyed him coming on for the last hour. Gave a great perspective from a coach's purview and a doctor's and rest of therapeutics and everything you go through with an athlete. So I really appreciate his time. And as I said, coming up in the July issue of Amazon's Fitness Magazine, look for his article from the Coach's Corner, where he'll talk more on the whole industry and what's going on. A lot of what you saw here tonight, but in article format. And not going to hold him to whatever he wants to write. He can write. But, that was a column that we had going, and we try to get that back going, the Coach's Corner. So look forward to seeing that in the July issue. Also, if you go out on AmazonsFitMag.com, you can order the latest issue with Vera Majume. AmazonsFitMag.com, click on issues, and then purchase the magazine, as well as all the other previous issues that you see out there that have been published over the last 3 years with Amazon's Fitness Magazine. Everybody's not going to be for you, but that doesn't mean that everybody's against you. But what it does mean that everybody's watching. So give them a show. We'll see you next time.